As she settled into position, Kestrel's training took over. She could feel wind direction changes through tiny variations in air pressure against her cheek. The temperature differential between the valley floor and mountain ridges told her exactly how bullet trajectory would be affected at different elevations. Most importantly, she recognized something the other snipers had missed. The enemy marksman wasn't randomly choosing targets. He was following traditional hunting patterns that Samuel had taught her to identify years ago. The shooter was moving between positions using natural game trails, staying downwind, using terrain features exactly the way a skilled hunter would track deer. When the lightning flashed again, Kestrel saw movement in a location where conventional military wisdom said no sniper would position himself. Too obvious, too easy to spot from most angles. But perfect if you understood that sometimes the best hiding place is the one everyone assumes is too obvious to use. 47 seconds until the next lightning strike. 47 seconds to line up a shot that would save 23 lives. Kestrel controlled her breathing, adjusted for wind and elevation, and waited. When the sky lit up again, her grandfather's voice whispered in her mind, "Make this shot count, little hunter." The rifle kicked against her shoulder once. The enemy fire stopped immediately. Within minutes, the trapped platoon was able to move to safer positions and establish communications. Medical evacuation helicopters arrived as soon as the storm cleared, saving lives that would have been lost to prolonged exposure and blood loss. Thorne found Kestrel cleaning her rifle in the motor pool the next morning, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. He stood there for a long moment before speaking, then told her that he had been wrong to judge her capabilities based on assumptions rather than demonstrated skills. Staff Sergeant Thorne dismissed her with a wave. Just another pretty face who thinks she can handle real combat operations. But when insurgents pinned down an entire platoon in the Afghan mountains and 3 seasoned snipers had already failed to neutralize the threat, Specialist Kestrel Vance would have exactly 47 seconds between lightning strikes to prove that her grandfather's Cherokee hunting lessons and her obsessive study of wind patterns could save 23 lives hanging in the balance. Specialist Kestrel Vance, 26 years old, adjusted her rifle scope as mountain winds howled through the Afghan valley. The firebase around her buzzed with nervous energy. Another patrol trapped by sniper fire. Another impossible extraction mission ahead. Most soldiers saw a petite woman with steady hands and quiet confidence. They didn't see the hours she spent studying ballistic charts while others slept, or how she could calculate wind drift and bullet drop faster than most people could read their morning coffee order. If you want to hear more stories about veterans who defied expectations, make sure to hit that subscribe button. These heroes deserve to have their stories told. Kestrel had grown up in the North Carolina mountains, where her Cherokee grandfather taught her that hunting wasn't about power or aggression. It was about patience, precision, and understanding the invisible forces that most people ignored. Wind direction, temperature changes, animal behavior patterns, all the tiny details that made the difference between success and failure. Now, 3 tours into her Army career, those childhood lessons had transformed her into something the military rarely acknowledged. A sniper whose accuracy ratings surpassed men twice her size with twice her experience. Kestrel's path to the Army started with loss. Her father, a Marine Corps veteran, died in a construction accident when she was 15. Her grandfather, Samuel Vance, stepped in to fill the void with ancient Cherokee wisdom, wrapped in modern survival skills. Every dawn before school, Samuel would take her into the Blue Ridge Mountains. He taught her to read wind patterns by watching how leaves moved at different elevations, to judge distance by understanding how morning mist affected visibility, to remain perfectly still for hours while observing deer migration routes. Most importantly, he taught her that true strength came from knowing more than your opponent, not just being stronger. Samuel had been a Marine Scout sniper in Vietnam, though he rarely spoke about those days. Instead, he focused on passing down generational knowledge, how Cherokee hunters could track animals across seemingly impossible terrain, how to become invisible in plain sight, how to make one shot count when your family's winter survival depended on it. When Kestrel enlisted at 18, she carried those lessons into basic training. While other recruits struggled with marksmanship fundamentals, she was already calculating environmental factors that most soldiers never learned to consider. Her drill sergeants noticed, but few took her seriously. The army had designated her as a vehicle mechanic. But when her unit deployed to Afghanistan and needed additional marksmanship support, Kestrel volunteered for every shooting competition and training exercise available. The morning everything changed, Staff Sergeant Marcus Thorne stood before a room full of soldiers, addressing the sniper crisis that had plagued their sector for weeks. An enemy marksman had been picking off coalition forces from impossible angles, and 3 different sniper teams had failed to locate or eliminate the threat. Thorne, a 15-year veteran with multiple deployments, spread tactical maps across the briefing table. His jaw was set in the way that meant he was tired of losing good soldiers to an invisible enemy. When Kestrel raised her hand to offer her analysis of the shooting patterns, Thorne barely glanced up. He told her to focus on keeping their vehicles running instead of playing soldier, in situations beyond her understanding. The dismissal stung, but it wasn't unusual. Most of the men in her unit saw her mechanical skills as proof that she belonged in the motor pool, not on combat operations. They assumed that someone who could diagnose engine problems and rebuild transmissions couldn't possibly understand advanced ballistics or tactical positioning. Sergeant First Class Ramon Gutierrez, the unit's designated marksman instructor, was slightly more diplomatic but equally dismissive. He acknowledged that Kestrel had impressive range scores, but insisted that paper targets were completely different from real combat situations. According to him, she lacked the mental toughness required for life-or-death shooting scenarios. Even worse, the other soldiers had started making jokes about letting the motor pool mechanic handle their sniper problems. They suggested that maybe she could fix the enemy's rifle instead of trying to outshoot him. The breaking point came when Thorne announced that he was requesting additional sniper support from headquarters rather than utilizing available personnel, who had consistently demonstrated superior marksmanship abilities. In his words, this situation required real professionals, not mechanics who got lucky at the shooting range. Kestrel said nothing, but her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind. Sometimes the quietest hunter brings home the biggest deer. That night, Kestrel sat alone in the motor pool, cleaning her rifle while thunder rolled across the mountains. The familiar weight of the weapon in her hands brought back memories of sunrise hunting trips with Samuel, when the only sounds were wind through pine needles and her own controlled breathing. She thought about her father, who had always told her that being underestimated was sometimes an advantage. People who didn't take you seriously often made mistakes, revealed weaknesses they would normally keep hidden. The frustration burned deep, but not because of wounded pride. 3 more soldiers had been wounded that afternoon, while the leadership wasted time requesting backup instead of using the resources already available. Good people were getting hurt because conventional thinking couldn't accept that expertise sometimes came in unexpected packages. Samuel had taught her that anger could be useful if channeled correctly. The Cherokee hunters who fed their families through harsh winters weren't the loudest or most aggressive. They were the ones who studied their prey most carefully, who waited for the perfect moment, who never wasted a shot. Kestrel field-stripped her rifle and began reassembling it in complete darkness, muscle memory guiding her fingers through each component. This was meditation for her, a connection to the countless hours of training that most people would never see or understand. Tomorrow, she would prove that being underestimated was their mistake, not her limitation. The emergency call came at 0347 hours. 2nd Platoon had been ambushed during a routine patrol, pinned down in a narrow valley by accurate rifle fire from multiple elevated positions. The enemy sniper had returned with reinforcements. Within minutes, the firebase erupted into controlled chaos. Thorne was coordinating immediate response while radioing for helicopter support, but the weather had turned violent. Lightning split the sky every few minutes, making aircraft operations impossible. The first rescue team encountered devastating accuracy from the hidden positions. 2 soldiers were wounded before they could establish effective cover. The enemy, marksmen, seemed to anticipate every movement, every tactical decision. Thorne deployed his best available sniper, Staff Sergeant Kevin Morrison, a decorated marksman with 4 combat tours. Morrison spent 40 minutes trying to locate the primary threat, before taking ineffective shots at suspected positions. The enemy remained invisible and deadly. Next, Sergeant First Class Angela Torres, recently arrived from sniper school, attempted to provide overwatch for another rescue attempt. The result was the same: wounded soldiers and no progress toward eliminating the threat. As Torres retreated with a grazing wound to her shoulder, Thorne faced an impossible situation. 23 soldiers remained trapped with limited ammunition and no air support available until the storm passed. Time was running out. Gutierrez suggested that conventional sniper tactics weren't working because the enemy understood American training methods. Maybe they needed someone who thought differently, who approached the problem from an unconventional angle. That was when Kestrel stepped forward, gear ready, rifle cleaned and sighted. She told Thorne that she had been studying the topographical maps and had identified the most likely shooting positions based on wind patterns and natural concealment opportunities. Thorne looked at her like she was suggesting they send in the base cook to handle combat operations. The next lightning strike illuminated the valley for exactly 2 seconds, and Kestrel had already calculated the interval pattern. 47 seconds between each flash, consistent for the past 30 minutes. Thorne reluctantly agreed to let her attempt what 3 trained snipers had failed to accomplish, but only because they were running out of options and soldiers were dying. Kestrel moved to an observation position that the others had dismissed as tactically unsound, too exposed, too difficult to retreat from quickly. But her grandfather had taught her that Cherokee hunters often succeeded by going where their prey never expected them to appear. The formal after-action report credited Specialist Vance with neutralizing the enemy threat through superior tactical analysis and exceptional marksmanship under extreme conditions. More importantly, it recommended immediate evaluation for advanced sniper training and potential promotion. Within 6 months, Kestrel was selected for the Army's elite sniper school, where her unconventional background became a teaching tool for other students. Her instructors realized that traditional military thinking sometimes missed solutions that came naturally to someone trained in different traditions. Gutierrez became one of her strongest advocates, incorporating Cherokee hunting principles into his marksmanship instruction. He learned that patience and environmental awareness could be more valuable than raw aggression or conventional tactical doctrine. Years later, Kestrel would train other soldiers who had been underestimated by their peers. She taught them that being different wasn't a weakness to overcome. It was often the exact advantage that made the impossible become achievable. Her grandfather Samuel never lived to see her receive the Bronze Star, but she knew he would have been proud that his lessons had saved American lives in mountains half a world away from home.